I'm going to make a very quick pivot to our first poster session research panel. So as you all know, what we had originally intended for the conference was that we would have a poster session this evening. We'd have drinks, we'd have food, we'd have 15 fantastic poster presentations. And we can't do that. So what we wanted to do was give each of the folks who had prepared a poster for the conference a 5-minute opportunity, either today or tomorrow, to give us a quick overview of their work. And we have 5 of those presentations now. And we'll start with Herbert Chang from Dartmouth College. Herbert, it's yours.
Great, thank you. Let's see if this works. I'm sorry. Is my screen sharing okay?
Yes.
People can see the screen okay? Oh,
it's great, Herbert. Looks great, thanks.
Great, okay. So before the elections, there was a lot of concern about generative AI, and in lieu of today's discussion about visual fiction as AI-generated content as visual fiction. So our project going in was really, does AI-generated content actually change policy preferences? So AI in elections is a long-standing concern. Since 2016, social bots were shown to share divisive information. But this is the first time where bots don't just disseminate misinformation or information, but they also generate it as well, with the rise of ChatGPT and models like DALL-E and Midjourney. So our big question is really just what happens when people see generative AI content, especially on their policy preferences. And so can people see the slides okay? Okay, quick, yeah. So in political science, a classic way of testing policy preferences is to use conjoint experiments. And so the idea here is we show respondents like 2 hypothetical candidates, candidate A, candidate B, that have different stances on policy issues. This could be the economy, healthcare, immigration, and climate change and foreign policy. And these are all sourced directly from Trump and Harris's campaign. And the idea is we then mix and match all of these different stances. And then we ask the respondents to choose candidate A or candidate B. And so if the idea is if the respondent cares a lot about, say, abortion, they will choose the candidate that has that more frequently. Okay, so the way we measure whether policy preferences change after they see AI or non-AI images or messages is first we show 5 of these conjoint tasks for respondents to do. And then after that, we give respondents a treatment. So this could be an AI-generated image, non-AI-generated image that is associated with a message. And then they do another conjoint task. But this is actually one of the previous conjoint tasks from before. We repeat this 5 times. So this allows us to measure whether or not they switch after seeing an image or a message. This is an example of a message. So Kamala Harris aims to be a communist dictator from day 1. This is obviously not a real image of Kamala Harris, right? And this is AI-generated. So just as a little bit of background, my lab has been scraping Instagram and TikTok posts since April 2024. There are about 2 million with 1 billion engagements each. And then after we scraped all these posts, what we did was we labeled them using ChatGPT, like what the topics were, whether they included people, and also whether they were generated by AI or not. Then the idea was we would split it into 30 treatment arms. So this is text only, text plus photo, and text plus AI image. We also had stances, so whether a message is left-leaning or right-leaning. So the example before would be right-leaning. And then we would also have 5 topics. So this is taxation, abortion, Gaza, Harris, and Trump. And then after all this, we ran it 4 days prior to the elections and recruited about 2,400 respondents. Cool. So directly to the results. These are just the main conjoint findings. So the first thing we find is polarization is very extreme at the issue level. The way to read this figure is if you're above this dotted line, you're more likely to choose, say, Harris's position. So the blue dots, which are Democrats, are more likely to choose Harris's stance on immigration. Yeah. And so what we see here is that in most of these points, blue dots tend to choose Harris's position more, red dots tend to choose Trump's position more. Democrats care the most about abortion, and Republicans tend to care the most about immigration. Interestingly, all voters tend to prefer Harris's stance on healthcare. So this is just the general policy preferences. Okay. So the big question, does AI cause people to switch policy preferences? To show this, we use a heat map. So the idea here is we just show all the configurations and whether or not they switch or not, and whether it's statistically significant. The y-axis is the treatment variables. So this is stance, topic, modality. So left-leaning, right-leaning. Then you have all of the 5 topics we showed before, and whether they were AI plus text, photo plus text, or just text only. The x-axis is the partisanship of the respondent and the policy issue. Red indicates a significant switch towards Republican stance on those policy issues. Blue, a significant change towards Democrat stance on those policy issues. So if we were to look at this graph directly, what we'll see is on the left side, we have a lot of blue dots. On the right side, we have a lot of red dots, which indicates that when there is a switch, when a switch is triggered, Democrats tend to switch towards Harris's stances on things, and Republicans tend to switch towards Trump's stance on things. Democrats are much more likely to change policy preferences, so they're much more likely to be triggered compared to Republicans. Interestingly, independents are the least likely to change, which is quite interesting. Also interesting is when the switch is triggered, Democrats tend to switch towards abortion, so they seem to fixate on abortion as an issue. And for Republicans, the issue that they fixate on is abortion and immigration. So these are the ticks on the top of here. We just aggregate the number of times switches happen. And abortion for Democrats, for instance, occurs 19 times, so very frequent. Lastly, for Democrats, switching happens in an equal amount when they receive in-group and out-group messaging. So if they have a left-leaning message and a right-leaning message, they're almost equally likely to switch, whereas Republicans tend to only backfire. So when they receive out-group messaging, they're much more likely to switch. Interestingly, independents, when they receive right-leaning messages, they're more likely to switch. So closing remarks, does generative AI impact policy preferences? There seems to be limited evidence. Partisanship matters more. There are interesting backfiring patterns exhibited by Republicans and independents. And this is still, at the hypothetical stage. There seems to be a mechanism where in-out group messaging causes partisans to fixate on sort of the most salient election issues, and in this case, abortion and immigration. What I wanted to also highlight is methodologically, in absence of working directly with social media platforms, it still is possible to combine these large-scale computational studies with survey experiments for rapid, ecologically valid inferences. All our stances, all our policy issues were sourced directly from the field. I also wanted to highlight 2 studies that we also did using those 2 million posts. The first is analyzing AI versus memes on the elections, where we find that AI-generated content doesn't really go viral. It only goes viral if it's combined with memes. And also we compare TikTok and Instagram and their role in the elections as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Herbert. So if folks have questions for Herbert, please put them either in the chat or the Q&A. We'll go to Ross Dahlke next from Stanford University. And again, please put questions in the chat or the Q&A.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me in my screen all right?
You're all set, Ross. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Well, thank you, Michael and Betsy and Leslie and Sabrina and everyone else who made this pivot to online so seamless. My name is Ross Dahlke. I am as of a couple weeks ago, a new assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And just a couple weeks before that, I defended my PhD dissertation at Stanford University. And I will be presenting some of the work from my dissertation. And I'm going to be talking about politics and misinformation in personal messaging applications. So past work has focused on politics and misinformation on what I call the open web. So there are a lot of great studies out there documenting, say, the prevalence of misinformation on social media platforms or via web browsing data. But my research examines what about these private spaces that are enabled by technology, such as personal messaging applications. Personal messaging applications such as text message or even encrypted platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal have raised a lot of public and academic concern in recent years. There have been academics, admittedly in some of my own work, that has speculated that things like misinformation are moving to these encrypted private channels. Some journalists have referred to WhatsApp as the wild, wild west of misinformation. But these personal messaging applications are difficult to study. There are technical challenges, one, the infrastructure just isn't set up for academic research. The messaging within these platforms generally occur in end-to-end encrypted applications. And so even if a platform like Meta, who owns WhatsApp, wanted to share data with researchers, they couldn't because the data are encrypted. So as a result, past work has been limited to things like self-reported use, qualitative studies. Some work has begun to examine the more public parts of these apps, such as WhatsApp groups, but little work has examined the actual messages that people receive in the more private parts of these spaces. And so as a part of my dissertation, I developed this application, which I call Siren, supporting international research in encrypted networks. And what it allows me to do is participants download the application with informed consent, and it effectively allows me to capture in real time the actual messages that participants are receiving in these personal messaging spaces. And so this study that I'll be talking about is I recruited 349 participants from a national sample of US American adults via the survey firm YouGov. Participants downloaded the application, and I was collecting all the messages that they received from October 23rd, 2024 to November 9th, 2024, so the weeks around the 2024 US presidential election. I received demographic and political and individual level information from YouGov on the participants. And in total, I received 88,606 messages from these 349 participants across 12 messaging platforms. But really, the bulk of the messages came from 4 different platforms: text messages, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Telegram. And so in looking at, there's a lot of data, what is it that we want to examine? And I looked to some of the literature on the open web to see what sort of questions we should be asking. And so in looking at the open web, one of the big things that a lot of papers point to are just the top line exposure. What % of American adults are exposed to certain types of information on the open web? Kind of some of the main findings are that almost everyone is exposed to at least some news and politics on the open web. And when talking about misinformation more specifically, past work has found that about 50% of participants of American adults were exposed to misinformation websites in the weeks around the 2016 US presidential election, and some of my past work has found that fell to about 25% in 2020. And then in asking about who is more likely to be exposed, there are some really consistent findings in the misinformation literature. And that's older adults and Republicans are the most likely to be exposed to misinformation on the open web. And so when we ask, what about personal messaging applications, that's exactly what this talk is going to examine today. And so to start with the top line exposure, just what % of people are exposed to different types of content in personal messaging applications? So here is a graph. On the x-axis are different types of messages, whether the messages that participants received were political, whether they had elite content, so messages from political campaigns, whether they're interpersonal political discussions, whether they contain links to journalism, so links to credible news agencies, or links to known misinformation websites. Then on the y-axis is the % of my participants that received at least one message in each of these categories. So to call out a couple, about 2/3 of my participants received at least some political message in their personal messaging applications. And for both political elite discussions, so again, these are like campaign messages, as well as kind of interpersonal discussion. Wow, did you see the election result? About half of my participants were each exposed to those 2 types of political discussion. When looking at journalism, so high quality news, about 20% of my participants received at least one message with a journalism link. And then if we look at misinformation, which had so much public fear from academics and the press, only 1.1% of my participants received messages containing misinformation links in them. Of course, links are a bit narrow of a way to approach it, and so some of my future work will work on expanding that. And so if we compare the open web to personal messaging, the upshot is in personal messaging applications, most people receive political content, but misinformation was relatively rare, and only 1.1% of participants receiving messages. Then if we turn to demographics. Yeah.
1 minute.
Okay, thank you. If we look at whether Republicans and older adults are more likely to be exposed to misinformation, I find that older adults were not more likely, at least in my sample, to receive misinformation links, but Republicans were more likely to receive misinformation links. And so some similarities and some differences to the work on the open web. And so thanks to my dissertation committee here for all their help in this project, and thank you all for listening.
Awesome, Ross. Thank you. We've got some questions for you in chat, so we'll come back to those in a couple of minutes. Next up, we have Jacob Devasier from UT Arlington. Jacob, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I'm surprised that you pronounced my name correctly, or at least in the French pronunciation.
I have a French-Canadian PhD student, and he's been tutoring me.
Okay, very interesting. So yeah, thank you. Today I'll be showing off some of the work that we did last year in publishing a system called ClaimsLens, and how we use it to fact check some voting-related misinformation or voting-related claims on social media or wherever. So to start off, a brief background on what ClaimsLens is. We built an automatic system to use voting records to fact check voting related claims. And I'll get into a live demo of that here in a sec. But let's first take a look at one of these such claims. So at some point last year, I was browsing Twitter and ran into this claim here, which was from a tweet that says, after the Sandy Hook school shooting, Ted Cruz voted against legislation to require background checks on gun sales. And this is what I wanted to use going forward on all of my examples using the system, because I ran into it in the wild and it's very interesting. And of course, these voting related claims and other claims or possible misinformation do have impacts on the elections. In this case, we were focusing on particularly Senate elections because one of the presidential candidates was never in the Congress, so there are no voting records on them. So let us go to ClaimsLens, and I will be doing the first live demo of the conference, which will be interesting. Hopefully everything goes well, but just in case I have a backup. So here's our ClaimsLens website. It's open to anyone to use, and you can enter in a voting related claim, and there's a few examples if you want to test it out yourself. So we enter in this claim here, and after a few seconds of loading, I'll skip the loading to a already preloaded example here. We focus this system on a few main points. Very important for us to emphasize structure and explainable techniques to communicate the reasoning for why we came to our conclusions about these claims to the user. So here you can see that we're highlighting specific parts of the claim. These are specific things that we are using in the fact-checking process. So for example, Ted Cruz here is who we identified in the claim as the person that the voting claim is about, and the legislation to require background checks on gun sales being the issue that the claim is about. And to just make sure that we're communicating the things that we're finding correctly with the user, we show kind of a summary of who we've retrieved and what they look like for familiarity. And to show where our system is actually working, we retrieve a set of bills that are related to the given issue in this claim. So some of these may be relevant to the claim, some of them may be irrelevant. Of course, search is a very difficult task, so we won't always see the best results everywhere. But as we scroll through here, and hopefully this is large enough to see, I do have to zoom in a little bit. you can see each of these little boxes is a bill with a title and a summary. And some of them are noted as irrelevant, or some of them will have an alignment of like supports or refutes, or there might be some other labels in between. And each one of these bills also has a summary collected from the official US Congress. And if you want to, you can, show more and read through here. And of course, reading through these bills will take sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, depending on your level of familiarity. But of course, we want to try and cut down that time because, as has been mentioned here a couple times already, the speed at which fact-checking takes place in relative to the speed at which people can just spew out misinformation is very slow. And so we want to try to reduce that time for fact checkers to find some of these evidence to fact check these claims. And so one way we do that is by utilizing a large language model to read through this bill summary and take into account the vote on this bill and the claim that is made, and determine whether or not the vote on a particular bill aligns with the claim that's made. And so here is a alignment of supports. And we also provide an explanation for why our model came to that conclusion. And so without even reading into the bill, our model comes and says that the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act includes provisions to expand background check requirements for individuals age 18 to 21. The bill summary indicates that the act enhances background checks, which aligns with the claim that the legislation involves background checks on gun sales. Ted Cruz voted nay, which supports the claim that he voted against the legislation to require background checks. So this may be one example of what the original poster was referring to, or it may be something completely different. But it helps us in finding this evidence, which can help to support or refute different claims that people are making. And of course, the system is publicly available. So if you want to give it a shot with your own claims, or if you have any questions about how it works on the inside, or any future follow-ups from this, I'd be happy to answer that at any point during this. But yeah, I'll give it back to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Great application and tool. So next up is Corrie Emerson from Verified Voting. Corrie, floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Michael. One moment while I share my screen. Excellent. So thanks again for having us here today. So we're a nonpartisan, nationally based nonprofit whose mission is to strengthen democracy through the responsible use of technology in elections. At our organization and really across the entire election administration space, we've learned that, and we've directly experienced how disinformation thrives in the post-election period when election day ends, but those results aren't confirmed yet, especially in the period following the 2020 election, and to a much smaller scale, even this past election season. Despite media projections, the results are unofficial on election night. A lot is happening after this big election day, right? And elections offices around the country by a lot of those wonderful folks that were on the last panel to help validate the election results. And this includes election audits. So we work closely with election officials in the field implementing processes like robust post-election audits that check the initial election results that help demonstrate that the winner won, that the loser lost. And this is what our research in early 2024 focused on. It offers recommendations that can help explain and potentially pre-bunk claims about how votes are counted. And it focused specifically on a type of audit called a risk limiting audit, which I can talk a little bit about. But a lot of these findings can be applied to other types of audits and any type of process that can be perceived as being complicated, because the term risk limiting audit, as we found, just didn't really land with folks. So we did this through 3 phases. The first was 8 focus groups of likely voters in Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. We followed that up with a 19-minute survey nationwide quantitative survey to really hone in on messages about audits to find some specific language that might potentially land with folks. And we finished with a qualitative board, which I found really interesting, with local election officials who logged in over a period of several days. They answered questions, they conversed with each other. It was really great to hear how they collaborate with different election officials from around the country. This whole study was conducted by Lake Research Partners and was funded by the Election Trust Initiative. Some key findings: voters are confident about the election systems in their own states, at least when this survey was conducted back in early 2024. But they also had little to no knowledge about how elections work. This was not surprising to us. It confirmed what we thought. Many voters didn't really know anything about audits. They generally understood how they voted, whether it was putting that vote in the mailbox or whether it was putting it in the scanner. But after that vote was out of their sight, they really just stopped thinking about the process altogether. And this is a really big issue when it comes to the post-election period, when those results aren't certified yet, where a lot of the disinformation starts to spread about election results. Upon learning about risk limiting audits and about election audits generally, we learned that they can be positioned as a proven way that helps affirm election outcomes, and this does increase confidence with voters. Risk limiting audits as a term, while it didn't land, they were broadly supportive across political ideologies when given a description of what a risk limiting audit was. Voters responded affirmatively to really simple, positive language about election processes. And finally, election officials want voters to turn to them for information. And there is room for outside organizations, academics, et cetera, to collaborate with and provide resources for election officials, but election officials really should be centered in the process. Really quickly, some messaging recommendations. Again, keeping it simple, avoiding jargon, using clear, concise language and visuals. We have a video about risk limiting audits that we showed in the focus groups. Folks loved it. They thought that the imagery, the animation, it really simplified what they thought was a complicated process. The name did not land. They like messages that are framed positively, using words like accuracy, using words like checks. Also considering your messenger. In the survey, election officials scored relatively highly when it came to who you would like to hear about election processes. Poll workers also scored fairly highly when it came to who they would like to hear from about elections. Emphasizing bipartisanship, emphasizing transparency. These are things that came up in the last panel as well. Folks in the focus groups said over and over again that there's no such thing as nonpartisan anymore, which is disheartening, but it is the climate that we're in. So whenever we can emphasize certain processes that offer bipartisanship, offer transparency, it's a really important thing. And finally, centering election officials, they felt a strong calling to continue the work they do, and they're passionate about their work. Their big wish was that the public knew anything at all about audits. They exist, they have a purpose, and they validate the vote count. They are also extremely under-resourced, extremely understaffed, and have difficulty reaching their constituencies, which is something that I think we've seen improve over the past election cycle. And for more information about our study, you can scan this QR code. It'll take you to a website with a really long webinar, a messaging guide about risk limiting audits, and some other materials. And my email address is here if you have questions. And of course, I will take them as well. So thank you so much. Thanks. And back to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you for that. And thank you. Thanks to Herbert, to Ross, to Jacob and Corrie for quick presentations, fantastic research. And again, we'll be putting these posters and any other information that you all want to give us about your research papers and things like that on the conference website. So with that, we're concluding our morning session.